The study was now managed by the Centers for Disease Control, an agency of the Public Health Service. And here, the first rumblings of concern began. A young epidemiologist learned about the study and tried to have it exposed.
We collected the studies, put them in a package, and sent them to the Washington Post and the New York Times and so on, and waited for the major break to come. Well, of course, it never came. We were fairly naive about how the media worked. I think now we would know that we should have written a press release and we should have, had the contact and we should have followed up and all that sort of stuff. But at this point, we thought all we had to do was tell America that something was wrong here and everything would be all right and everybody would understand. And everything was not all right, and not everybody understood, and nothing was done.
Across the country in San Francisco, the story took another critical turn. Peter Buxton was a public health service VD worker.
One day in the coffee room at work, an older associate was telling a story of a man with insanity, a black man, who was rushed by his family to a physician. His first examination probably in 20 years, other than in the study. And the physician treated him, and the physician was punished by the local medical society. I couldn't reconcile that. I thought, what is this? There's something going on here.
What was going on, as Buxton wrote in a letter to the CDC, was racism. A few months later, he was invited to Atlanta.
There was a conference that was going to be attended by the doctors, among other people, who were running the study in Tuskegee. And one of them in particular was outraged at what I had done, at what I had written.
I remember meeting Peter Buxton, and I remember my concern, my reaction to what he was proposing.
He couldn't wait until we got down the hall and into the conference room to begin lambasting me for what I had said. And it was, "See here, young man." And we're getting valuable statistics, and we need this to diagnose people who are coming in, to find out how long they've had the disease, to know how properly to treat them, etc.
We were dealing with a very important study that was going to have the long-term results of which were actually to improve the quality of care for the black community. So that these individuals were actually contributing to the work towards the improvement of the health of the black community, rather than simply serving as merely guinea pigs for the study. And of course, I was bitterly opposed to cutting off the study for obvious reasons.
The group of guinea pigs was 100% black. That in itself, in the midst of the fervor of the 60s, was just a red flag. I couldn't understand people wanting to do something like that at that time.
At that time, not only was the civil rights movement in full gear, but there was a growing concern about the rights of patients and subjects of medical research. The Public Health Service itself had issued guidelines to ensure that patients could not be subjected to experimentation without their full knowledge and consent. But even those guidelines were ignored by the scientists controlling the Tuskegee study. Finally, in 1969, under pressure from Peter Buxton and others, the CDC convened a panel, all white and all doctors, to review the study. After 3 hours of debate, the panel voted to continue the study and withhold treatment from the men. They rationalized that since the men had gone without treatment for such a long period of time, that giving them penicillin might not help anyway. At the meeting, there was just one lone voice of dissent.
My view was that they should treat all the patients and tell them what had happened as best they could, even if they didn't succeed, and even if they felt the patients wouldn't understand. I felt they owed it to all concerned to clarify what they had been doing, why they had been doing it.
If we had gone to the community and told the men that they had had syphilis and had not been treated, and that they were now still alive and healthy and did not need any more treatment, I don't think we would have been holding out much we would not have been providing them with anything positive. We would just have been telling them that 40, 50 years ago people did something to them, and now we're sorry.
The idea, well, the damage had been done, there's not much that could be done for the men at this point, telling them would only upset them, is a very powerful example of a paternalistic idea of both medicine and research that can be very, very damaging. And this idea that, well, we might as well continue since we've gone this far is one of the aspects of the bureaucratic inertia that really just continued to move the study forward one time after another.
I was terrified. I felt that they were in big trouble and that they were going to create a great stir and that it would be publicized to the great disadvantage of the Public Health Service.
In 1972, Peter Buxton gave his files to a reporter for the Associated Press. The Washington Star broke the story in July. Within weeks, the government launched an official investigation. In October of 1972, 40 years after it began and after at least 28 deaths, the Tuskegee study was officially halted.
Well, after I found out all about it, it did make me, I might have said some curse words out by myself. But I ought to have been ashamed of myself. I wouldn't have did them like that.
That's what the newspaper article was saying, Willie. That's what guinea pig means. Those men were just watching us to see what that bad blood would do. She took you out of that Birmingham line, didn't she? That penicillin could have saved Ben. Hardman made you a dancing man. I gotta find that paper. I gotta find it and give it to my lawyer.
And he handed me the newspaper and he said, I'm Charlie Pollard in this paper. And he explained to me how he was at the stockyard a day or so before and was approached by a newspaper reporter. And he discovered as a result of that conversation that he was a part of what has become known as the Tuskegee Syphilis study, and he wanted to know whether or not I could do something for him about it.
On behalf of the survivors and families of the deceased, Gray filed a lawsuit against the Public Health Service and other agencies of the U.S. government. In an out-of-court settlement, each subject received less than $38,000, a fraction of what Gray initially sought for the violation of their rights.
They had an absolute right to know, one, that it was a study, two, that they were not being treated for their ailment, three, they needed to know and had a right to know what was wrong with them. And they should have been the persons who would have given their consent, or at least exercise a choice as to whether or not they would want to or not want to be involved in the study.
It's been more than 60 years since the Tuskegee study began, and 20 since it ended. But the echoes of Tuskegee reverberate today, and many questions still plague the scientific and medical community. What are the legacies of Tuskegee? What has been gained from the sacrifices of the men of the study? Most observers have criticized the science, noting that goals were vague and protocols flawed. Many subjects received some treatment for their syphilis, either sporadic doses of mercury and arsenic in the early days, or antibiotics given by doctors outside the study for other infections. Record keeping was sloppy, and men in the control group who became infected were even switched into the study group.
My regret is, in terms of the study, I have none. As a scientist, and say one would like to have seen an ideal scientific study, but we're dealing with human beings over a long period of time, and this is impossible.
In the end, the study confirmed existing data about the natural course of syphilis. and found no evidence that syphilis differs from race to race, so-called negative results.
We hadn't really proven any points. If you look at the medical literature as an index of what we've learned, there were 25, 30 papers in the medical literature, most of them reporting negative results.
I don't think anything of scientific significance was learned in the Tuskegee study. But that's not to say that we can't learn an enormous amount about our culture and the practice of science and the practice of medicine from this Tuskegee study that might be of very significant use for our society. And I think that Tuskegee really told us about racism. It really told us about the nature in which very powerful prejudices and hatreds can distort the world of medicine and science.
From the standpoint of many African Americans, Tuskegee is not an isolated incident. For a population with an infant mortality rate twice as high as whites and a life expectancy almost 10% less, there is an entrenched distrust of the white medical establishment. Among blacks today, one legacy of Tuskegee is how it fuels and inflames that distrust.
There are a lot of black people who don't trust white doctors because in this country we look at the skin first. And anybody looking at that, they will say, see, I told you, you can't trust them. Don't you go to those white doctors.
Understand why African Americans feel that way. Don't dismiss the feeling, because the feeling is there. Try to understand why it is. And until we do that, there will be fears of African Americans. There will be distrust of the medical profession. There will be distrust of clinical trials. And we have to do this.
And there are more lessons from Tuskegee. This and other abuses prompted greater protection for experimental subjects. And today, informed consent is required for all research. But Jay Katz investigates cases where that principle is still violated.
Important abuses still occur, and these revolve around the fact that the subjects of research are not fully appraised of the nature of their participation. The lessons of Auschwitz and Tuskegee are these, that we should be very, very careful about abrogating the rights of individual human beings, individual subjects of research for any purpose, including for the noble purpose of advancing science.
First, do no harm. That is the first, the law. One should not carry out medical care research in a way in which harm is done. What we should do then is maximize what good may be achieved given that first law. And so, those are the basic rules. We've always known them. They're the part of the Hippocratic Oath.
If within the event that a doctor knew what is wrong with us, they should have treated us. That's the way I feel about it. Now, Lord, we want to thank Thee for these Thy people have come so far in this undertaking. Pray our Father that would bless them, guide them to and from that place of abode. Lord,
today, Herman Shaw celebrates his 90th birthday. He's had a long life and, for the most part, a healthy one. Shaw and Howard and Pollard are among the lucky ones. The government gambled with their lives, but these men survived. Others were not so fortunate. According to government reports, of the 400 men in the study, at least 24 and perhaps as many as 100 died as a result of untreated syphilis. Many others suffered the grim consequences of rheumatism, blindness, and insanity. Most would have been helped or saved by medical intervention.
So the tragedy is those men can't speak today. And I speak for them. But if they could speak from the grave, they would say, my government should never have done it.